Your Sky, My Sky. Chapter 3. During my days abroad, I worked hard to adjust my life to the simplest rhythm, letting my drifting heart float high in the air. I made sure that my mind's radar only received the brilliance of the sunshine, the ease of the flying birds, the vitality of the spring grass, and the leisure of the soft clouds. I became a carefree person with a relaxed heart, soaring with the birds and drifting with the floating clouds. I let a free soul wander this vast land, imitating and befriending nature, constantly learning from it. I cast aside the harsh winds and relentless rain of life, refusing to give them even a glance, and devoted myself entirely to immersing in the life of nature. I imagined myself as a bird in flight or a blade of spring grass, wanting nothing more than a free heart that could fly, soar, indulge, and find joy. In fact, finding happiness was not difficult. It simply required disregarding certain things. It was April days. When I arrived in Seattle, known as the Emerald City, spring was in full bloom. Originally, Seattle was not part of my plans. After ending that relationship with Larry in Vancouver, I spent a period feeling adrift, my days busy but directionless. Later, after deciding to pursue my studies in the United States, I found I could no longer stay in Vancouver. At that time, Phil, who lived in Seattle, conveniently invited me to stay with him for a while. It was time to fly, I thought. I slept on the floor of Phil's rented small room. The room, less than 150 square feet, was already cramped for one person. Adding my 2 large suitcases made it feel like a storage room. At night, sleeping there felt as crowded as a refugee camp. In that student apartment, there were about a dozen international students, sharing a common kitchen and bathroom. The narrow living space left no room for further luxuries, especially for students living on a tight budget. They could not dare to expect anything else. During the day, Phil attended language classes at the University of Washington, leaving me with nothing to do. I wandered around aimlessly with no purpose. Phil was a highly disciplined person who scheduled his daily activities meticulously. His life was regimented, in stark contrast to my carefree ways. Despite our differences, we were very close. While I led a reckless life outside, he never participated. Yet, when I grew tired of my adventures, his place became my best refuge. In order to avoid disrupting his routine, I often roamed the university area at all hours. Phil had warned me earlier that the security in the US was not as good as in Canada, and I should avoid wandering alone. The streets near the university were chaotic, filled with homeless people, especially after dark. He told me I needed to break the habit of chatting with strangers. Could I really change? I doubted it. Today, I obediently stayed in my room and didn't go anywhere. I watched TV and flipped through books and magazines in the room. When I got tired, I wandered to the communal kitchen to stretch my legs. In the kitchen, I met a student from the same floor. Naturally, I greeted her, but to my surprise, I received a strange and indifferent look in return. My smile froze in place as I watched them disappear behind a door, leaving me feeling quite disheartened. I asked Phil about it and found out that, in this apartment, even people living next door to each other rarely interacted, especially with a newcomer like me. I thought about my time in Canada, where people frequently visited each other's rooms, chatted and laughed in the kitchen, and shared stories. I felt a wave of nostalgia. America, oh America, it truly was an extraordinary country. I followed Phil to school when he went to his classes. The vast campus always had many places where I could spend a good part of the day. Most of the time, I spent it in the library. The library had an audiovisual area where one could borrow music or videos and provided seats with headphones. With the headphones on, I could enjoy wonderful music or watch captivating films. This was a happy place, and I often enjoyed being a happy person there. The only downside was that this happiness could only be enjoyed alone and not shared. Happiness should be spread around, like bees and butterflies dancing in the spring air, or the spring breeze scattering cherry blossoms and plum petals on the ground. One day, a blond young man sat at the table next to mine, holding a soundtrack of The Phantom of the Opera. As soon as he sat down, he put on his headphones, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes, completely immersed in the music. I was already very familiar with the music from The Phantom of the Opera and was delighted to find a fellow enthusiast. Watching his absorbed expression as he listened to the music, occasionally humming along with the melody, I couldn't help but glance at him a few more times. Since his eyes were closed, he wouldn't know I was peeking at him. Eventually, I lay my head on the table and stared at him from the side. Just when I was lost in thought, suddenly he opened his big round blue eyes, and our eye contact met. I froze on the spot immediately.
Hello.
He said with a bright smile, "You must be listening to All I Ask of You." I said slowly,
Wow. How did you know?
The silly blue eye looked surprised. Seeing the silly look on his face, I deliberately wanted to tease him. We Oriental can meditate. I have superpowers and can listen into people's minds. This silly blue eye opened his mouth wide with an incredible expression. I laughed. "I'm just kidding. You were humming along just now," I laughed. Our laughter broke the earlier awkwardness, and we started chatting. The silly blue eye's name was Jeff. He worked as a manager at a supermarket and came to the University of Washington during his free time to take some computer courses, hoping to earn a degree someday.
Otherwise, I'll be outdone by David. David is now a senior majoring in fine arts, specializing in painting. Our home decors are all David's masterpieces.
He kept talking about David. Who was David?
My boyfriend, why?
Jeff said innocently. Since going abroad, why had I always encountered such straightforward responses frequently? Was it really a cultural difference? Or did I just meet unusual people? This feeling filled me with a mixture of enlightenment and emotional warmth. No matter what, I decided I would keep this straightforward friend. Seattle's famous specialty was undoubtedly coffee. SBC, Seattle's Best Coffee, was a local favorite, and everyone said SBC's coffee was much better than Starbucks. For someone like me who didn't understand coffee, I really couldn't tell the difference. I drank coffee based on my mood. Sometimes, on a whim, I would buy a cup to feel a bit romantic. Unlike these Westerners, for whom coffee had long been a part of daily life, I still preferred drinking tea. This habit had not changed since I came abroad. While others needed a cup of strong coffee in the morning, I continued to enjoy my cup of fragrant tea. Like today, when Phil and I went shopping downtown, we each carried a cup of coffee, wandering from Macy's to Nordstrom. I couldn't finish my strong coffee and didn't like the taste of sugar and creamer, so I bought a cup of Earl Grey tea and mixed the hot tea with the cooled coffee. The distinct layers of flavors created a really unique taste. No matter how good the coffee is, it's a waste on you, Phil shook his head and said with a smile.
Dear Anne, I had just sent you a postcard when I received your letter. Looking at the dates, it took only a week to arrive, which wasn't slow. I called you, but no one answered. You must have been out and having fun. I read the collection of Van Gogh's letters until around 6 in the morning, and perhaps because I stayed up too late, I didn't sleep well. I got up around 10 to make breakfast. A sumptuous breakfast to enjoy slowly on a Sunday morning while writing you a letter at the dining table. Wait a moment, I'll make a cup of Milo and continue chatting. Recently, because the plays I direct are of European flavor, I became even more enchanted with European culture while gathering materials. Not modern Europe, but the late 19th to early 20th century. Perhaps I used to live there in a past life. Lately, I often heard about gloomy and tragic things. Is it really so hard for people to be happy? True sorrow should be very quiet, shouldn't it? I was actually grateful that I was just feeling extremely annoyed and had already shed the unbearable mindset of not wanting to live. I loved reading and playing, and these two things could sustain me through much of my life journey. After all, love, for me, had transformed from the longing and waiting of the past to a sense of cherishing in the present. Love was rare and shouldn't be used carelessly. I wouldn't settle for something mediocre if it couldn't be found. So emotionally, there was freedom coming from the emptiness. Actually, studying abroad and achieving something significant in academics doesn't crucially matter much to you, I think. The most importantly is that you are fulfilling the promise we made to our dreams when we were young. It was this promise that helped us navigate many of the thorns in our growth. Of course, someday, whether we're in Munich or Paris, we will complete this grand endeavor. driving from Paris to Munich and from Munich to Paris to commemorate our 17-year-old selves. Perhaps by then, we might already be 70 years old, but that won't matter. Yes, I firmly shake your hand and make the deal. Feeling a bit sleepy, I'll take a nap. Gia Gia.
Reading Jiajia's letter made my mood return to the days of youthful exuberance. Back then, we always had so many enchanting dreams. As young people, we seemed to have a carefree attitude towards life. Books we read at that time could be discarded the next day. Songs we sang back then could bring tears to our eyes. Roads we traveled could be just for the sake of eating a plate of stinky tofu, walking from the Minxing community to the Shilin night market in the middle of the night. This throbbing thrill felt like the startling experience of being taken to the terrace of the overlook after death. It was as if memories from a previous life quietly emerged at unexpected moments, startling us. Fortunately, it was only a fright. In search of some university application materials, I spent the entire morning in the library. It wasn't until I felt very hungry that I realized it was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So, I gathered the scattered materials on the desk, grabbed the bread I had brought in the morning, and decided to buy a cup of hot tea to have lunch in the sunlight. Stepping outside the library, the bright midday sun warmly lit the earth, and groups of students sat on the plaza steps, basking in the sun. Seeing the plaza outside the library already filled with students soaking up the sun, I didn't want to join the crowd and turned in another direction. I thought to myself, find a patch of grass, have lunch, and take a nap in the daytime and make a daydream. The warm golden sunlight pierced through the new green branches, casting tiny, shimmering patches on the ground. When the wind blew, it scattered the golden specks all around. I found a large patch of shade, dropped my backpack, and sat down on the grass. A cup of hot tea and the Taiwanese-style bread bought from Chinatown made for a wonderful picnic. After finishing this simple picnic, I lay down under the tree, resting on the soft grass, inhaling the fresh scent of spring. I watched the birds busy in the branches and the squirrels climbing on the tree trunks. The warm sun and gentle breeze made me realize wasn't the Eden of my dreams just as simply beautiful as this. I allowed myself to stay lost in this beautiful dream for a long time, unwilling to wake up. I comforted myself with the thought that there was an Eden in dreams, and a paradise still existed in my imagination. However, I wondered how long this dream could last. While I still had the opportunity to dream, why not indulge more? A little squirrel scurried back and forth in front of me, arching its back and turning its nimble eyes, staring at me for a long time. There were often many squirrels running through the vast campus. Especially after a cold winter, they seemed to be particularly busy in this warm spring day. In the University of Washington campus, tall trees were abundant, and squirrels were always seen jumping between branches or running across the grass. I wondered, were they busy searching for food or looking for companions? The squirrels here were famously not afraid of people. If you squatted down and waved your hand pretending to have food, a large group would come rushing in, a very amusing scene. I remembered the first time I saw students feeding squirrels on the grass. I was so amazed and excited. But when I finally held peanuts in my hand and faced a swarm of squirrels, I got scared and ran away, throwing the peanuts aside, which drew laughter from onlookers. Gradually, I gained experience, and not only did I stop being afraid, but I also let the squirrels climb onto my body and shoulders. Today, this lone squirrel, who knew whether it was hungry or lonely and wanted someone to play with. Little one, where are your companions? Are you lonely or hungry? I gently asked the squirrel in Chinese, not knowing if it understood. I took out the leftover bread from lunch and tore a small piece, which the squirrel quickly grabbed and ate. Finishing that piece of bread, its round eyes stared at me again. Other squirrels, seeing the treat from afar, gathered around, and I sat among the group of squirrels like a king. With 2 hands, I couldn't keep up with feeding so many small mouths. The little creatures saw me as easy to bully, and in the scramble for food, they climbed onto my body to exercise. Unable to shoo them away, I lay on the grass, hid the bread under me, and played hide and seek with them. While engrossed in playing with the squirrels, I hadn't noticed someone else had joined us, smiling and watching us from the side. I felt uncomfortable being stared at by a stranger. Therefore, I handed the remaining bread to the person, saying, "You feed them too. It's fun." The man took the bread and said,
Great sunshine, isn't it?
I looked up at the sky, absent-mindedly replying, "Yes, great sunshine." That man continued saying,
I didn't see you in the library earlier. I didn't expect to find you here playing with squirrels.
Surprised, I paused for 2 seconds, turned, and saw. Oh, it was Jeff. These blue eyes all looked the same to me, and when I was distracted, I shouldn't have spoken so casually. Sorry, I was too engrossed in playing with the squirrels to notice it was you. I felt a little embarrassed, so I had to make an excuse and change the topic. Where are you headed later? I asked, patting my pants as I stood up.
No plans. I'm on the evening shift at the supermarket today, so I came to the library to find some materials. You know, I want to take some courses in the fall.
How about this? Let's go to that cafe on the corner of University Way and chat. Do you have time? When I felt bored, I wanted to chat with someone and maybe dig up some stories.
Sure, I don't start work until 6.
When Jeff smiles, his smile revealed a row of white teeth. University Way was just an ordinary street, but the businesses along it thrived on student patronage. Used bookstores, cafes, bars, restaurants, grocery stores, and a cinema made the short street as bustling as a small town. The corner cafe was a gathering place for students, offering affordable prices and a place to spend half a day. The other day, Jeff and I had just been shooting the breeze in the library, but today I was determined to find out more about him. Young Jeff had left his hometown on the plains of Idaho at 18, working and studying part-time with the help of a sister in California, allowing him to complete a 2-year college course on the West Coast. He had spent a year in Japan before returning to Seattle 2 years ago, where he met his current boyfriend, David. Now, besides working at the supermarket, he was planning to take some computer-related courses. Time flew by as we chatted. Checking my watch, it was almost 5:30 p.m. I was supposed to go with Phil and his classmates to downtown for shopping tonight. We had planned to meet at the library after their classes, and now it looked like I was going to be late. As we left, I shook hands with Jeff and even shamelessly asked to visit his and David's home. I was very curious to meet David after hearing Jeff talk so much about him. Jeff agreed wholeheartedly, but I wondered if he meant it. Sometimes, I felt these blue eyes often made empty promises. They frequently agreed to things but quickly forgot, so I always took their words with a grain of salt. I went to the school to find the international student advisor, partly to inquire about the possibility of applying to the University of Washington and partly to ask about other schools. American universities typically had several international student advisors whose purpose was to help foreign students study successfully. These advisors not only assisted with course arrangements but also covered accommodation, daily life, and even psychological counseling. This international student advisor was a man named Peter, who was probably in his late 30s. He was slightly overweight, with thinning hair, but he was very friendly and enthusiastic. When I told him my purpose, he immediately pulled out a large envelope from his drawer.
Phil has already given me a rough idea of your situation.
It turned out that Phil had already met with him beforehand. The situation was not very optimistic. Given my circumstances, the chances of being admitted to the University of Washington were slim. I might have to first attend a language preparatory course, and many of the credits I earned in Taiwan would not be recognized by the University of Washington. This meant I would have to start from freshman or sophomore year. I didn't have the time and money to spend on that, so I immediately said it was not feasible. Peter then took out some materials from the large envelope, which turned out to be information about other schools. He also told me that the library had even more information on various universities, and I could go there to look through it. I felt very grateful for Peter's meticulous help. When I expressed my gratitude, he blushed with embarrassment and kept apologizing for not being able to help with the University of Washington. Stepping out of Peter's office, I realized it was drizzling outside. The weather in Seattle could be so gloomy that it drove people crazy at times. Walking through the long rows of cherry trees in the rain, I saw that the trees were already full of buds, seemingly ready to bloom at any moment. It looked like Seattle's flower season was about to begin. Recalling the brilliant cherry blossoms I had experienced in Vancouver, although Seattle's were about a month later, they would eventually be just as spectacular. It seemed that life had its own arrangements, and each season had its own splendor. Nature would not shortchange anyone. What about my blooming season? I couldn't help but ponder as I walked along. Today, the sun was exceptionally bright, so Phil and I wandered around Seattle, taking in its charm. On the hillside behind the pier, there was a Pike Place market, which had a history of nearly a century and had become a landmark of Seattle. The market was bustling with people, and the stalls were diverse, with colorful flower stands and vibrant vegetable stalls. The sight of fish being tossed around at a few seafood shops had become a spectacle. Both locals and tourists liked to visit this market when they came to Seattle. Having stayed in that little room for a long time, coming out and immersing myself in the crowd allowed me to feel the vitality of human presence, reminding me that I was still alive, still part of this world. A life filled with color appeared more splendid. The noisy, mundane world felt more intimate. This vast and mundane world was the haven for those who could not endure loneliness. Pathetic as I was, I remained a part of this secular world. Unable to transcend the mundane, I was destined to drift into this realm. It was enough to just look around the vibrant market without the intention of buying anything, as if passing through it meant possessing it. Beyond the market and going downhill was the waterfront. Phil mentioned that there was a small tourist tram in front of the pier, carrying visitors along the waterfront, winding all the way to Chinatown. The tourist tram had 2 cars and moved very slowly through the city. We hung onto the back of the tram, facing the gentle sea breeze, letting this tram of foreign land carry us, following the sun and the crowd, slowly moving forward. The roadside merchants all greeted tourists in similar fashions. Various types of Indians told visitors about the long and painful history of the past. During the Western pioneer period, many people, driven by their aspirations for the future and dreams of an unknown life, came here to dig mountains and reclaim the sea, creating the largest city in the northwest of the United States. Dreams were truly a great driving force in life. How could one live without dreams? No matter how uncertain the future might be, having dreams gave people the courage to move forward. Having love allowed people to walk forward fearlessly. Dreams and love had always been the 2 main driving forces in my life. Chasing love because of dreams. Pursuing dreams for love. The 2 complemented each other, enabling the universe to thrive endlessly. I hoped that this journey, accompanied by gentle breezes and warm sunshine, would take me to the land of my dreams and love. Where the dust rose, I had left my sorrows and grief behind. Accompanied by the rhythmic song of the tram tracks, I would pursue my dreams and love without fear or regret. On a lazy afternoon, I felt a bit bored and restless. Alone, I leaned on the windowsill, staring blankly at the quiet street. I imagined myself trapped in a prison, yearning for the blue sky outside the window. In the spring afternoon, the sun was warm but not enough to make one sweat, and a lazy atmosphere floated in the air. Looking out from the small window, the sky was so clear that there wasn't a single wrinkle. A few sparrows were hopping noisily on an old pine tree across the street, chattering away and breaking the silence of this quiet, dull afternoon. I thought of myself as a caged bird, trapped in a beautiful cage. My heart was full of unbearable loneliness, longing for someone to open the cage door so that I too could fly to the old pine tree and listen to what the sparrows were discussing. Perhaps they were talking about a grand feast. Alas, the years spent in the cage were feared to let loneliness gnaw at one's heart. Loneliness can break one's heart. Loneliness can make one grow old. I went grocery shopping with Phil and happened to run into Jeff, who was on duty. Jeff was holding a thick ledger, counting items on the shelves, and I curiously followed him around. After we finished browsing, I followed him into his office.
How have you been?
Jeff asked as he sat down, his hands already typing away on the computer keyboard. Pretty good, I said, casually opening a bag of chips on his desk and starting to eat.
I've been so busy lately, often not getting home until midnight.
How's David?
He's busy too. He's about to graduate and is occupied with his final exhibition and a lot of school chores. Sometimes we don't see each other for days.
When you guys have some free time, I'll come visit you.
Sure, definitely. David mentioned a few days ago that he wants to invite you over for dinner.
All right. See you later, I said. Seeing how busy Jeff was, I didn't want to disturb his work any longer, so I turned and walked out of his office. As I stepped outside, Phil had just finished checking out, pushing a cart loaded with bags, waiting for me outside. Besides its prestigious reputation, the University of Washington was also world-renowned for its beautiful campus. I remembered visiting the campus once last late autumn. At that time, the entire campus was a sea of golden yellow, quite different from the fiery red maples of Vancouver. The red maples exuded a heroic grandeur, while the golden scenery at UW had an aristocratic pride. When spring arrived, the highlight was the cherry blossom grove. Not far away from the library, there was a path lined with cherry trees. The tall cherry trees formed a canopy with their branches, and when the flowers bloomed in spring, walking under the trees felt like strolling through a tunnel made of cherry blossoms. The sky was filled with flowers, and the ground was covered with petals, making one feel that heaven could be no better than this. Walking under the floral umbrella, the gentle breeze carried the pale white and pink petals, which drifted along with the wind. Cherry blossoms possessed a heavy sense of tragedy, quite different from the solitary and proud roses. The beauty of cherry blossoms lay in their abundant bloom and the falling petal rain. Whenever the breeze passed, pale white petals fell silently and quietly onto one's hair and clothes. This exquisite beauty evoked a tragic sense of awe, as if life could end here. This feeling made one's heart ache with a kind of ecstatic pain, a beauty so extreme that the soul could not bear it. I heard that Japan had the highest suicide rate in the world, and I thought it was probably related to their national flower, the cherry blossom. The tragic consciousness of cherry blossoms, the pursuit of the ultimate in beauty, and life drifting down like cherry blossoms have been deeply implanted in the consciousness of the nation of Yamato. Such a moving feeling was beautiful, but it was fleeting. Tonight, alone in the corner cafe of University Way, I revisited the book Siddhartha under the dim yellow lights. I can think, I can wait, I can fast, said Siddhartha. I let myself settle, learning the philosophy of waiting. Everything would eventually come to pass. Time would always give us an answer. Many things in life required the right moment. Rushing didn't help. I let myself patiently await the changes of nature, avoiding impatience and cultivating a calm confidence. With a steady gaze, everything would eventually bow down. There was nothing insurmountable or impossible anymore. Thus, success and failure had no definite answers. What defines success? What defines failure? People's stubbornness only added to their troubles. Suddenly, I realized that the so-called wandering meant adapting to changes without being changed oneself. That was true wandering. Wandering was beyond time and space. Since this was the case, there was no need to painfully seek answers anymore. I should simply act freely, not questioning, for questioning itself was a mistake. No matter where I went or what time it was, everything was natural. Think, wait, and embrace emptiness. Early in the morning, the phone rang, waking Phil and me from our sleep. On the other end, Jeff's clear voice came through.
Are you free tonight? We'd like to have you come over for dinner.
I hadn't expected this forgetful blue eye to be so thoughtful. He really remembered what he had said a few days ago.
My sister flew in from California today, and we all want you to come.
Jeff paused and then said,
David is also eager to meet you.
"Oh, a family gathering." Jeff quickly reassured, hearing my hesitation.
No problem. David has been hearing about you for a long time. He really wants to meet my very interesting Oriental friend.
I scratched my head and thought, when did I become interesting? Since the host had already made such a big deal of it, I decided to accept the invitation. I had long wanted to meet the legendary David, about whom Jeff always boasted. It was my first time visiting someone's home and being invited on such a short notice. I was unsure what gift to bring, so I decided to buy a bottle of red wine from the liquor store on University Way, which was a common practice among Westerners who attended parties. I was just following local customs. When the doorbell rang, Jeff answered the door and greeted me with a big hug, almost causing me to drop the bottle of wine. As I stepped inside, the warm lights welcomed me. Under the lights, I saw a tall, slender man standing by the dining table, holding a large platter. A blonde woman sat on the living room sofa, holding a cigarette in her hand. The blonde woman, named Carol, was Jeff's dear sister. The tall, slender man must have been David. David quickly put down the platter and warmly shook my hands, saying,
"Welcome. I've heard a lot about you from Jeff."
I shrugged and smiled at David. "Don't listen to him, he's a big mouth." Jeff spread his hands in a non-committal gesture, which made Carol laugh. She invited me to sit on the sofa. As soon as I sat down, David handed me a beer.
Make yourself at home. I'll join you once I'm done in the kitchen.
David said before disappearing into the kitchen. Jeff and Carol resumed talking about their hometown, giving me a chance to carefully look around the house. Although the house was small, it was decorated with a unique style by someone with a keen eye. The yellow-orange lights dominated the life of the entire room, reflecting off abstract paintings hung on the red brick walls. A fire crackled in the fireplace, keeping the harsh spring chill outside from invading this beautiful castle. On the mantel, several ancient pottery vases added a sense of rustic solidity. Green trailing plants hung from the ceiling in the corners, singing songs of life and telling stories of the old wooden table and wicker chairs. White curtains fluttered in the night breeze in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, as if waiting for someone to return each night. Books with yellowed pages lined the bookshelf, whispering the tales of ancient vicissitudes on each page. This was not just a home. It was a paradise, a dreamland that appeared in my dreams every night. I genuinely admired Jeff for owning this dreamland, and he proudly started boasting again.
All of this is David's work. He's a top student in UW's art major.
Oh, come off it.
David, holding a platter, came out of the kitchen, blushing and smiling sheepishly.
If you keep boasting, I'll probably starve to death.
Carol laughed loudly, drawing my attention back to her. Carol had short hair, simple and refreshing attire, and sharp, makeup-free cheeks that exuded a unique American woman's vitality. The corner of her eyes, marked by the years of vicissitudes, revealed her age, and I guessed she was nearly 40.
Dinner is ready.
David called everyone into the dining room, while his hands were still busy setting the table. The dining room was next to the kitchen, with an old rectangular table covered with a white lace cloth. Under David's skillful hands, the whole table looked like it came from heaven. A silver candelabra with burning candles added a romantic glow, reflecting off the shiny plates and glasses. A bottle of red wine waited to be opened, and a bunch of fresh flowers stood next to it. Once everyone was seated, David diligently served the food and poured the wine. The flickering candlelight reflected in his calm eyes, creating a beautiful scene that left me staring in admiration. What kind of skillful hands and thoughtfulness could bring heaven to earth like this? Carol praised David and teased Jeff, joking that she could never create such a splendid feast. At the table, David generously served food to my plate, while Jeff and Carol bantered, teasing each other. Carol even shared Jeff's embarrassing childhood stories of bedwetting, causing Jeff to scratch his head and hurriedly try to explain. His silly reaction made everyone burst into laughter. David naturally held Jeff's hand, comforting him, and said,
Don't worry, I'll just wash the sheets more often.
This made everyone laugh even harder. Carlo's loud voice, Jeff's goofiness, and David's warm and gentle demeanor made me deeply love this family, especially when I noticed David's tender and affectionate gaze towards Jeff. My heart became even more tangled. What profound affection was this, shaking my heart to its core? This dinner made me feel like I was home, The sense of déjà vu made me reluctant to wake from this dream. After dinner, we didn't let David wash the dishes. Carol took over the kitchen cleanup. Jeff busied himself by adding more wood to the fire in the fireplace, and I helped David make coffee and set out the cups and saucers. We all gathered in front of the fire in the living room, with a cup of coffee in hand. The fire burned brighter, warming our hearts, and even our hidden thoughts couldn't stay concealed. I loved that fire so much that I just lay down on the carpet in front of the fireplace, letting my heart get closer to the blazing flames. David put on some soft music, filling the room with a light, airy atmosphere. Everyone occupied a corner of the living room, chatting casually about various topics. Jeff and Carol rarely saw each other. They talked mostly about their hometown and family matters. Despite the estranged nature of modern American families, the bond between these siblings remained strong. Their parents divorced when they were young, and they grew up with their mother, experiencing the harshness of life and the cruelty of a stepfather. Carol endured countless beatings for the sake of her younger brother. After their mother passed away, there was nothing left to keep them at their broken home, so they each went their separate ways to find their own paths. Carol indeed was a strong woman. Her marriage had failed many years ago, and she had been living alone in California, fighting for survival in the real world. She currently worked at a travel agency and lived a stable life. She was in town for only 2 days before flying to Denver to get married.
Getting married?
Jeff's eyes widened in surprise.
This is kind of sudden.
David added,
Hey, I'm already 38.
Jeff asked with a serious expression.
Is it with that jerk?
Don't say that about Joe. He's not as bad as you think.
Why do you have to get married?
I don't want to live alone anymore.
You can move in with us.
Carol pointed at Jeff and David.
With you too?
Jeff stood up and said,
Listen, Carol, why can't you learn to let go of some things and try to enjoy living alone?
I'm really afraid of living alone. I can't stand that kind of lonely life in the middle of the night anymore.
You know, before I met David, I was alone for 5 years.
Jeff said slowly.
I have spent 5 lonely years searching for someone who never appeared, until I stopped searching. Do you understand, Carol? Loneliness isn't something to be afraid of.
Carol slowly walked toward the fireplace, staring at the dancing flames. She suddenly turned to Jeff and said softly,
When David moved in, I brought champagne and flowers to congratulate you. Why can't you congrat me now, just like I did to you too?
Jeff roared immediately.
Because he is a scumbag. Think about how he's treated you. How many times have you called me in tears recently?
I called you because I was upset. Things aren't always like that, though Joe and I argue sometimes.
Argue?
Jeff interrupted with a cold snort. Normally gentle Jeff could erupt like a volcano when angry. At that moment, I couldn't stay any longer. I got up and told them time for me to leave, and David, ever considerate, stood up to see me out. Outside, the night had already settled in, and the porch light burned alone, illuminating the endless night. The silent street was empty, with only a few cars speeding by, breaking the night's tranquility. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling refreshed and relieved from the earlier tension.
I'm sorry you had to see that on your first visit. Jeff's temper can be hard to handle, but he's a good person.
David said apologetically. I know, I replied with a smile, sitting on the front steps.
He loves Carol too much and is terrified she'll get hurt again.
With that said, David also sat down beside me. I shrugged, unable to find the right words. Everyone feared getting hurt, but somewhere in the world, people were always suffering and shedding tears. This scene seemed to never end, repeating the same drama across different times and places. Until we learned to free our hearts from their shackles, we were destined to bear the wounds that came our way at unguarded moments. At this moment, the night air seemed refreshing and the evening breeze gently swept in. The spring season seemed to have been for a long while. The early awakened summer insects were eagerly playing the tunes of summer, sometimes lively, sometimes melancholic. The newly green branches, whenever the wind rose, danced gracefully, reflecting the lamplight against the dark backdrop, creating a romantic scene of late spring. Under the encouragement of the clear night, several roses on the front porch exuded a rich fragrance more gracefully. Breathing in the unique atmosphere of the night, I couldn't help but feel like singing. Life with songs is truly blissful.
风儿，你在轻轻地吹，吹得那满园的花儿醉。风儿，你要轻轻地吹，莫要吹落了我的红蔷薇。
Sitting beside me, David curiously asked what I was singing about. I translated it into English for him. The wind you are blowing gently, blowing the flowers in the garden drunk. Wind, you have to blow gently. Don't blow away my red roses. He said it was beautiful. I smiled and continued singing.
春天的花是朵小蓓蕾。
In spring, the flowers are just budding. In summer, they grow even more gorgeous and crimson. In autumn, the petals fly everywhere. In winter, for whom is their heart broken? The cycle of seasons, the substitution of the universe, narrates the endless romance of the earth. Whether it was spring flowers, autumn moon, summer sun, or winter snow, they all had their own value of existence, all telling us how wonderful to be alive. This world is such a wonderful song, never sung enough, never loved enough. I envy you and Jeff, I sighed.
This relationship wasn't easy to come by. We truly cherish it.
Tonight, I feel like I'm back in my own home. You two have managed a home so well, it's really not easy. David said softly.
Yeah, unfortunately, my own family can't be as open-minded as his family. They're not willing to understand my life. Sometimes I feel so lonely. Before I met Jeff, my days were like Walking Dead. My family, school, and friends, no one could understand the emptiness and longing in my heart. Once, I even thought about ending it all.
David, I really understand. I sighed and felt like looking at a mirror.
Now that I have Jeff, our life may seem ordinary, but the importance we hold for each other is something others can't comprehend. He has also climbed out of hard times, and now we can share hardships and joys together. This relationship is truly a miracle given by heaven. I don't ask for anything more.
In this chaotic and turbulent world, relationships between people had become increasingly thin. People lived for themselves and were living just for their own good. The only thing that could sustain interpersonal relationships was nothing but fame and fortune. Emotions, in this utilitarian society, had long been treated like dirt. For such pure, like a clear stream of love, giving without asking for anything in return, could only hide in the dark corner. Even in this extremely open society, it was still not accepted by most people. I was moved by their genuine treatment and their mutual dependence. Seeing others' lives and then looking back at my own, I realized my own weakness and cowardice. A heartbreak in Taiwan made me freeze my heart. When I was talking about going abroad to find a new place and new life. But what's the result? When I actually encountered it, I was so afraid that I hurriedly pushed that guy out the door. I knew I'd hurt Larry so deeply, a kind of selfish cowardice that made me, like a demon, hold a sharp knife and stabbed it into that good man's heart. Memories flashed one by one at this moment, like a speeding night train, playing rapidly in my mind. In those times, there was ignorance, tears, joys, and sorrows. Someone once said that memories make yesterday live again. Tonight's feelings, it's like I have boarded a train of time, constantly moving forward, the scenery and vicissitudes along the way. Everything was so vividly visible. What's frustrating was that such a beautiful past could never be kept, and the train could not be stopped. If the time train could really stay at a station, which station should I get off at? The confused teenage period, the pale adolescence, or the struggling young adulthood? This night, there were dreams in the darkness. In the midnight reverie illusions, it was all filled with the vicissitudes of the past. It had rained for 3 consecutive days, and I felt as if my heart was about to mold. Finally, this morning, the sun showed its face. Early in the morning, I eagerly ran out of the apartment and took a walk around the campus. The crisp morning air carried the damp scent of the rain. In the woods on campus, there was a fragrant smell of wood. The sun had just come out. The birds were singing clearly, and squirrels were scurrying through the woods. It seemed like everyone was rejoicing in the fresh morning. As I walked past a row of bushes, I suddenly heard a rapid chirping of birds. My curiosity was piqued, so I bent down to look into the bush. It turned out that inside the low bush, a completely soaked little bird was tangled in a long ribbon, the other end of which was tied to a broken balloon. The bird was struggling hard but couldn't fly. Seeing this, I quickly bent down and untangled the threads that were wrapped around the bird. I held the soaked bird in my palm, hoping to give it some warmth. "Dear little angel," How did you end up trapped here by this ribbon? I breathed on it and spoke to it gently, afraid that a louder voice would scare it. I quickly moved to a spot in the sunlight with the bird in my hand. Although the morning sun wasn't very warm yet, it was much better than the damp bushes. After a while, the bird looked at me, tilting its head as if asking, "Am I free now?" Then it lifted its head, spread its wings, and flew towards the sunlight. At that moment, I was deeply moved by the sight of the bird spreading its wings and flying away, so much so that I was speechless for a long time. I then realized that this was the true meaning of freedom. Humans have never been truly free. We could not fly like birds or jump like squirrels. Our hearts were bound by many unnecessary ties. Freedom came from the heart. No one in this world could give us freedom except our own hearts. The so-called freedom given by a country or society was just another form of cage. Freedom transcended time and space and was not limited by race. When we were born, Mother Nature gave us a free heart. As we grew older, we learned to shackle our hearts with layers of chains. Greed, fear, selfishness, these layers of constraints prevented us from being free. Just like the little bird in my hand, it didn't cling to the warmth of my palm. Despite being soaked, it just wanted to spread its wings and fly, because its heart told it that as long as it took off, it could have the whole sun. It turned out that my heart was the true source of freedom. If I wanted to be free, I needed to disregard some unnecessary things in life. When I no longer feared losing, freedom would already exist in my heart. Nature truly was a great teacher. David called and invited me to see his graduation art exhibition. The exhibition was held at an art gallery in the city, where David and several of his classmates displayed their works. David told me, in addition to exhibiting off campus, they also had to submit their works on campus as part of their graduation projects. David's paintings were just like him, warm and realistic. Whether it was watercolor or oil painting, his style made people feel very warm. Unlike the avant-garde and abstract works of other classmates, his landscapes and figures were reminiscent of a medieval dream. There was one oil painting in particular, depicting a living room with a fireplace burning warmly. A nude male figure sat in front of the fire, and the painting was titled "Home, Sweet Home." I loved the atmosphere in the painting. It brought an ordinary home to life. But the person in the painting looked so familiar. I pointed to the person in the painting and was about to ask when David and I simultaneously exclaimed,
It's
"Jeff?"
Jeff.
On Saturday weekend, Phil said he wanted to take me to see the salmon. What's so interesting about fish? Can we eat them? I muttered, wanting to sleep a bit longer. It turned out to be a canal, and the conservation organization built a water ladder along the river to facilitate the salmon that returned from the sea to spawn, to return to Lake Washington where they were born. Here, you didn't have to be a great person to see the fish swimming upstream. striving to reach the upper waters. I thought I was not destined to be a great person, as the fish didn't inspire me to strive for success. Instead, I spent the whole day feeling sad for these poor fish. I wondered what kind of call could make these fish so determined to swim upstream. That mysterious force had been at work in these fish for thousands of years. It seemed as though this force had long existed in the blood of these fish, destined to follow the cycle, unable to escape the wheel of reincarnation. So, there must be some mysterious call that has deeply existed in our blood for thousands of years. Otherwise, how could it be that, when the time came, that call deep within our souls awakened suddenly in the middle of the night? It called out to each lonely soul, like these salmon, circling the lotus pond generation after generation, endlessly. It turned out everything was destined. So why bother arguing with fate? The school was out for spring break. I wandered alone into a secondhand bookstore on University Way, looking for some books to pass the time while I waited for these days to go by. There were not many people in the bookstore, and I browsed the books a bit absent-mindedly. The unique scent of those rows upon rows of old books always had a way of enchanting people. Every time I walked into a secondhand bookstore, I would feel like I was walking into a cemetery. I believed that books had souls too. Whenever I lingered in a bookstore, it felt like my soul was receiving messages from those ancient souls, gently sighing, "Please, tame me, please." It was like a slight electric current passed through my chest, leaving my heart feeling numb. I sighed deeply, and when I looked up, I noticed a familiar figure in another corner of the bookstore. "Hi, you're here too." I walked over and patted the blond man on the shoulder.
What a coincidence.
David turned around and said with a bright smile,
I'm looking for some materials for my graduation project.
"How's Jeff? I haven't seen him in a while," I asked. David nodded and said,
He's doing well. I have good news for you. Carol is staying in Seattle. Once she finishes dealing with things in California, she will come to Seattle to start over.
David said excitedly. "So, no wedding then?" I laughed. David shook his head, turned around and put a book in his hand back on the shelf. "But I'm leaving," I said hesitantly. David was shocked and quickly asked,
What? Where are you going? Are you going back to Taiwan?
"No, I'm going to the Midwest. The university's class will start in the fall."
That's so far away. Once you leave, it'll be hard to see each other.
"Silly. At least I'll still be in the US."
Let's find some time to get together again, okay?
"Yeah, definitely." I nodded. David still needed to go to the bank and to run some errands, so he couldn't chat with me for too long. When he left, he repeatedly reminded me to visit his home before leaving Seattle. I agreed wholeheartedly, but felt lost inside. Watching David's hurried figure disappear, I was still dumbfounded, standing still on this lonely street in the afternoon, unable to move my steps for a long time. I felt as though my lonely heart was being gnawed at by insects, bit by bit. Why was it that on this long, dusty journey, my solitary figure was always trudging alone? Whenever the wind blew and the dust rose, my eyes became blurry. I told myself, go, take your own steps. Since you're just a passerby, you shouldn't long for the transient warmth of the way station. There's no return home for me here. If the east wind did not come, how can the willow catkins fly in March? I was not someone returning home. I was just a passerby. I was just a passerby. If you like my audiobook, please click like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.